Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Jacolby Satterwhite in Conversation with Derrick Adams and Tavia Nyong'o, or Jacolby Satterwhite, allow me to reintroduce myself. This is the second of 4 public programs in support of the exhibition Never As I Was, Studio Museum Artists in Residence 2020-21 on view at MoMA PS1 through February 27th. My name is Dan Huff, and I'm the Director of Public Programs and Community Engagement here at the Studio Museum in Harlem. On behalf of the public programs team, including Melania Graham and Tennille Mack, as well as Ilk Yasha, pinch hitting from education, because Mercury is playing games in this final retrograde day, who are running the backends today, and the entire museum, we'd like to thank you for joining us now that your options for engagement include both the digital and in-person worlds. This program is being recorded. We are grateful to Steno Captions for providing live cart captioning and Pro Bono ASL for ASL interpretation. Captioning can be activated by selecting the CC button in the Zoom menu bar at the bottom of your screen. During the program, if you feel called to, please feel free to use the chat feature to react, respond, and connect. With a mindfulness that within the space we share, that you show kindness, compassion, and respect towards our panelists and your fellow attendees. There will be time for more questions and answers after the conversation, so please enter them in the Q&A box found in the menu bar at the bottom of the screen. Today's program was conceptualized in collaboration with 2020-21 Artist in Residence Jacolby Satterwhite, who has the distinction of being studio's first mid-career artist in residence. During our planning conversations, Jacolby noted how the works on view in the exhibition marked a return to a first love, painting, as well as a crossroads of sorts as he moves into a new phase of his practice. I'll allow Jacolby the space to further elaborate. So you have a sense of this evening's program flow. Jacolby will briefly offer a presentation of works on view in the exhibition, and will then invite Derrick and Tavia to join Jacolby. Jacolby, if you'll join me now as I read your bio.
Hello.
Hi. Jacolby Satterwhite is celebrated for conceptual practice addressing themes of labor, consumption, and fantasy through immersive installation, virtual reality, and digital media. Satterwhite draws from references based in queer theory, modernism, and video game language, challenging conventions of Western art through a personal and political lens. A significant influence is his late mother, Patricia Satterwhite, whose ethereal vocals and diagrams for household products serve as the source material within a decidedly complex structure of memory and mythology. So Jacolby, I welcome you to share some slides with us, and then I'll come back to introduce Tavia and Derrick.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this wonderful, event. So are we going to share slides and I begin talking? Sure. Okay, so it was bittersweet that I didn't get to, be on site at the Studio Museum with my cohorts because of the pandemic and the new lovely building that's being created. But I think that everyone coming out of the lockdown, if there was a positive experience, there was a time for like a great reset and a time for like contemplation, the ability to kind of like marinate in ideas. And I feel like we're entering a decade of like philosophical renaissance. For me, I felt like I had enough time to slow down and regain a sense of agency as a creator. I mean, things are moving so fast in the 2010s. For like myself and for others, I feel like after my Pioneer Works exhibition in 2019, I had an itinerary that was like a 5-year itinerary all condensed into like 2020 before. So, when we went into a lockdown, I had time to reflect on what I needed to do. And I thought about how like the best, what brought me into the art world and with the platform was the Studio Museum in 2010 and 2012. Like 2010, I remember being so excited because I was or 2009, I was put into the magazine for like my piece Forest Nymph. And it was just like wonderful. And then my first exhibition was, I think, Shift with Lorraine O'Grady and who else? It was me, Lorraine O'Grady, and two other artists. But I remember showing Country Ball, and that I remember it became like it started a domino effect of very colorful 10 years. And so I felt like, it was time to, I had like 5 exhibitions with the Studio Museum after that, and or 4 other exhibitions. And I realized I really needed to do the residency to restart and to incubate, because I felt like that, this is a historical place and a canonical place for artists to really like reintroduce themselves to the world. I feel like they it's just, yeah. So I basically started it because I knew I wanted to get back to my original love, which is painting. I mean, I quit painting in my graduate school about my second year, because I felt like I had more agency over the conversation around my more experimental work and work that was rooted in my personal sphere and narrative. Because the history of painting is 400 years of like patriarchal, imperialistic narratives that are sort of like under the umbrella of like a white authority. And I felt like when I was in college, all of the conversations that I was having around my paintings was kind of like, like the art world was, they only gave permission for like 5 Black people to exist at a time in specific canons and genres. And all your teachers in these schools that cost $100,000 to go to, these teachers are like, they only have 2 Black students in each class. And it's strange. They don't know how to like, they're like, well, the only artist I know is X, Y, and Z, who's like, collected by Saatchi and showing with this kind of thing. So I felt constantly like my professors were trying to kind of find an armature for me to fit in with someone who's doing well in the market in the critical sphere that looked like me. But I was influenced by the Leipzig School in Germany and Neil Rauch and Mama Anderson. I was influenced by, Luke Tymans at the time. And a lot of them, I think that my paintings were sort of derivations of, something that was like a little bit like made by bodies that didn't look like me, but they were helping me figure out a space that I was interested in. And things from the Renaissance too, like El Greco and like Rubens and Piero della Francesca were and or Morandi, all these things were like really, really helping me build my formal building blocks in a way. But like, for some reason, I wasn't having a strong enough conversation around that work at the time. And thank heavens, my college hired Derrick Adams to come. I think he came in my junior year, but he was my senior thesis advisor in my senior year. And I was so excited to work with him because he was in a peer group of some of my favorite artists who are leading the world right now. And he's leading the world right now. And he had Rush Arts Gallery. He was just like a rock star coming to MICA. Like, and he looked like me. And, well, not like me, but you know what I mean. And it was like a breath of fresh air. I was so eager to do as much work as possible because I wanted to compile 3 years of missing conversation into this 1 year that I have with this professor. And so it was great. I did have a lot of conversation. I feverishly made paintings and all kinds of works and stuff while just trying, I was just eager to figure out how to make this work popping. And so I remember still being frustrated by like the canon and like all the conversations. I was, I was very frustrated. I was working super hard. And I remember Derrick said something like, he gave us like this assignment to go home and on Monday, bring something that is in our home that matters a lot to us that we wouldn't think the world would consider art, but it's like kind of the fuel to our practice in some kind of way, or not necessarily that deep, but it was something like that, something like it was like a show and tell. And, you know, I always carried my mother's drawings with me even before that. And they were getting interest from other professors when I was talking about how like they were influencing me. But I brought the drawings and I made this little video that was a precursor to my film, The Matriarch's Rhapsody, which was also the Studio Museum put in their art collection in 2012. So it was a precursor to that piece. And Derrick was like, this is what you need to be. This is something you need to drop everything. This is this is going to be a part of you for the rest of your life. And I mean, he just said so many, he in his eloquent way, he penetrated my brain to kind of refocus and dig deeper and think of and get that agency that I so wanted within myself, within my personal narrative. I remember reading actually a Corey Newkirk catalog from the Studio Museum at that same time, where he was talking about using his interior and personal narrative as a weapon for authority in the public art canon, or well, the way that he made those beaded curtains, using the Black vernacular to talk about big public things with the beaded curtains and all the like the strange kind of like weird niche things that happen in the Black home, to make sculpture out of like the public experience. And that was something that influenced me, and it was Derrick that influenced me. And so I moved on, went to graduate school immediately afterwards, because I was like, I had so much fire in me. And I remember Terry Atkins gave me a full scholarship to go to the University of Pennsylvania. And with this eccentric work, you know, I applied with paintings, but I also applied with like, say, at the beginnings of what, you know, everyone knows me for today, this stuff dealing with the world that I was building with my mother. So I was still making paintings at University of Pennsylvania, and but also working on my performance practice, and also working on like I was working on performance films, paintings, drawings. I was, you know, just like desperately building a conceptual practice that led me to going to Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture, and then really experimenting enough to figure out how to bridge it all together, which was to take my mother's drawings, trace 250 of them, make a massive archive of like, it was a pre-metaverse experience where I made, or pre-NFT, where I made these digital assets as a toy box. And I dispersed these assets in several films thematically, and also using my discipline and my formal understandings of painting and the space that painting creates, the four-dimensionality that paintings could have if you use the architectural program. You know, I learned how to make an elaborate, I made thousands of paintings since I was a child, and I couldn't have made Country Ball or Refined Desire or Birds in Paradise and understand how to deal with light, texture, space, axial symmetry, axial perspective, 3-point perspective. You know, like I wouldn't have understood how to like organize space and structure and formal composition if I didn't practice and meditate on the still image and color, knowing about tertiary and primary colors and how to like make a palette limited and poignant enough to actually conceptually relate it to like what my intention is with something that deals with like Black and queer subject matter or whatever. And so I used my painting, after tracing my mom's drawings and learning Maya and After Effects, I felt like the king of the world. I had this massive template based on my formal understandings of a traditional medium, but with my personal narrative, and also my experience with playing video games since I was 2 years old, and being a computer nerd because of having a computer at age 10. Like everything came together in this like big bang effect where I had complete control, and And so what we're looking, so just to fast forward, because I'm talking so much, I feel like I'm getting the talk out before we can even have a panel discussion. But like what you're looking at is fast forward to the lockdown. I spent 10 years making, 12 years making this massive body of work that was digital and sculpture and like performance based. And I was doing little drawings and paintings on the side, but I really wasn't, I was just traumatized, too traumatized to like bring in my first love back into the world. But after, you know, I think having a substantial career with what I did, and I said I have earned my right to incubate what I really want to do. And so I needed to slow down because the screen time making my films was making me mentally ill, making my back hurt. I was not able to really, I was just like really, really falling apart making 3D animations alone without an assistant or a budget. Everything was completely made by myself. And so that took a toll on me. So to actually stand up, have a gestalt experience with the surface, mix pigments and paint and make images and meditate on them and play podcasts and listen to music and like cook out. Actually, like making a painting was the only way I could go back upstairs. I also moved into a new place. Sorry, I moved into a new place that was like a brownstone. I have a painting studio on the second floor and a digital studio on the third floor. And using my body athletically, moving up and downstairs to paint, upstairs to do digital, there was a cathartic relationship between those two languages that made everything become effortless and joyful once again and not feel like very taxing as it was in the past 10 years. And so what you're looking at is sort of like me slowing down again, me, kind of like re-strengthening what I was beginning to lose because I was only working in one way. I was like losing my incredible sense of color, texture, light, space, and composition because I got so absolved by Cinema 4D. I don't use Cinema 4D, but like Maya and programs, digital programs, architectural rendering programs. I forgot my formal training was beginning to kind of disintegrate because it just became a training pipeline. So what you're seeing here is very personal paintings. I decided, well, if I'm going to start making paintings again, I don't want to do what people expect of me, which is this crazy surrealist Dali-esque. I don't want to use some airbrush and acrylic and be on some like trend gap. I want to actually paint alla prima like I'm Alice Neal or like Mary Cassatt, and I want to not use mediums, and I want to deal with Black figuration in a way that doesn't feel like it's popular in the market, which is like this thing about, I don't know, I feel like there's a certain formula that like you have to be under the umbrella of in order to be on the auction block at the art fair, if you know what I mean. I wanted to paint Black pathologies that were neutral, that showed like drug addiction, greed, lust. I wanted to show like where Black joy can exist in places in the middle. They can exist in a person who is like my father in this image, who's after Sunday dinner, after church, him being drunk and chilling and happy and exuberant and with his tie undone. The Whitney Houston image where she's caught off guard by the paparazzi, appearing to be really inebriated off of really hard drugs, but like also in this place of like, there's some joy in that, there is some pain in that, but it's in the middle. I wanted to operate in the liminal space, depicting portraits of Black humanity in a way that is not popular, like this painting of me in a hard time in my life, but also like playing around in this like dirty club doing a photo shoot. But it felt like it's just like this James Brown kind of guy in a Miu Miu suit sweating, but it just felt like it fit into that triptych. Also, the other paintings of Dev Hynes and myself in the landscape, like there's one wall that's dedicated to like, a more existential place of like illness and healing and you know, like I think that it's more bodily, more about appropriating something more existential, you know. And then there's other paintings on one wall that's dedicated to my lovers and friends. And
Jacolby,
yeah, sorry.
can we share the video?
Oh yeah, you can share the video.
Let's do that now.
Yeah, sorry.
Flexibility and ease, but really I've always been sitting with the same group of people.
Yeah. So
thank you. Thank you. Can I just quote you?
Yes.
You gave so many, you've already given so many gems. You've already given the curriculum. But there is this one quote, Black joy can exist in the places in the middle.
Yeah.
Let's linger with that as we welcome Derrick Adams and Tavia Nyong'o to the screen for the next part of this conversation. Derrick Adams is a Brooklyn-based artist whose work spans painting, collage, sculpture, performance, video, and sound. With his oeuvre, Adams probes how identity and personal narrative intersect with American iconography, art history, urban culture, and the Black experience. The artist explores how individuals are shaped by their physical, societal, and historical environments. His current solo exhibition, Looks, is on view at the Cleveland Museum of Art through May 29th, 2022. Tavia Nyong'o is an author, speaker, performance studies scholar, and curator. He works at the intersection of critical theory, performance studies, and social justice. The author of 2 books, The Amalgamation Waltz, 2009, and Afrofabulations, 2018. He is chair and William Lampson Professor of Theater and Performance Studies at Yale University and curator of public programs at the Park Avenue Armory in New York. And as I step back until the Q&A to get you 3 going, Jacolby already started, but Derrick and Tavia, if you want to give us your perspective of how you first came to know and discover Jacolby. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having us both here. And I'm really excited to be part of the conversation. Known Jacolby for some time. I think we met probably in 2007, 8, around that time. 7 at MICA. And I can remember my first semester at Maryland Institute College of Art. Before actually being Jacolby's senior thesis instructor, I was brought to Jacolby along with a few other Black students when I was asked to come there as a visiting artist, because there were a couple of students there who were accelerating at such a level that the current faculty didn't really know how to respond to the work they were making, because it was really work that was probing issues of Blackness in a very contemporary manner. They were painters, sculptors, performance-based young artists in undergrad. And we had met just briefly at that time, but as I came back as a senior thesis advisor at MICA, Jacolby was one of my students. And this year, I think it was a year long or semester long. I think it was a year long. It was the fall and then spring semester, which was an intensive class of studio visits and lectures and things, workshops that we all participated in. And one thing that I recall as kind of like the beginning of the work that you see now with Jacolby is, when we first met as an advisor, Jacolby was really focused in painting. And I think at the time he was painting images from Black porn sites, gay porn sites.
Yeah.
That was the subject of most of the paintings in Jacolby's studio. And, Jacolby at the time, I don't know your process now, but you were pretty vigorous and really speedy painter. Like you would work a lot, you would spend a lot of time working. Jacolby also was very active in just giving feedback to the other artists in the group, which was great. But I also noticed that there were other interests that kind of lie beneath Jacolby's conceptual framework for his paintings that were way more advanced at the time than the paintings that he was making in concept. The idea of the pornographic images kind of expanded in a larger way as he became, more developed as an artist, as we see the work now and the context and where the work has expanded. But at the time, I had an exercise I usually do with my senior thesis students where I ask them to go home and bring things to school that are somehow influential to their practice, but things that they may not necessarily think of as art or consider them as a direct inspiration in a way that most artists look at Western art and the things that we look at or were taught to look at school, because it's kind of how I make my work. I think about the things that I'm influenced by that may not necessarily be so much rooted in the Western ideas of what is valued in subject matter, but sometimes the things that we are inspired by are things that are just around us. We grow up with, we participate in, but we don't really think about them critically or even look at them in a way that is very analytical or dealing with more critical inspection. And so Jacolby brought back, with the other class who brought different things, but Jacolby happened to bring back a suitcase or two of drawings from his mother's collection of drawings. And that's, as well as cassette tapes of voice a cappella music with lyrics that his mom also composed and performed, and a slide presentation with juxtaposition images of Jacolby as a child and things related to the drawings and how they kind of had a conversation with each other. And that was kind of the slideshow and the presentation. And I was blown away. And I said to him after the class, I said, listen, this is your work. This is the work you should be making. This is the work that will last you a lifetime in trying to kind of unpack and deconstruct and really try to understand, the basis of all these things and how you as a person growing up in this environment, how that has somehow shaped who you are. And just the idea of the creative energy that he had at that time was kind of beyond just painting, even though painting is something that I participate in. A lot of artists participate in Jacolby, but I also saw him as being this kind of multi-hyphenate artist. And even at that time. So I thought that painting would definitely come about in some aspect of his work, but I felt painting was not just the only component of Jacolby's practice. And I started to really think about just what could happen. And so from that time on, Jacolby really started thinking about those things, but he didn't really dig in as much. I think he made like a sculpture. Was it like a house?
Yeah, it was like,
yeah.
I made costumes and I made like all the props that would end up being in the films and stuff.
Yeah, so those things kind of, became such a major component of just the premise of the work that people are seeing now. But again, but that was more the foundational part of what the work, how it started. That was kind of the basis, but it kind of began in that time. And I think that was around like 2008, 2009.
2008.
Yeah, that's when that's when I was leaving Rush Arts Gallery as the curatorial director. And I think one of my exit exhibitions there was called The Mothership Has Landed. And that's when I invited Jacolby to participate in the exhibition with a group of other artists. And and that was the beginning of it. And it was amazing.
Yeah, multi-hyphenate indeed. So how I met Jacolby is I was been thinking about that because I hardly remember a time when I wasn't aware of Jacolby's work. It made such a immersive impression on me from the very start, and his presence in the work as as his signature, but also his face and personality and his mother's drawings. When I first encountered the work, he was performing in pieces like Orifice at the Radical Presence at the, I think it was the Studio Museum actually, but also the Biennial. And so I definitely have the sense of like a character in a Jacolby Satterwhite video installation who sort of like starts to interact with like one of his avatars. And so a couple encounters stand out sort of early on from like 2012, 2013. One is in my capacity as a, well, I don't know, my capacity as something, Thelma Golden had invited me onto the think tank at the Studio Museum to consider the role of performance art in relation to the museum, and kind of out of that came a relationship with Valerie Oliver and Radical Presence a couple of years later, I think. And so I interviewed on a public program much like this, Jacolby at that early stage in his career, and we talked about his practice then. But the early encounter that kind of like stands out, I don't know if will embarrass you at all, Jacolby, when I say this, but that we were at like one of those parties at the new museum, and I was, you were introducing me actually, just like I was standing in the corner, and you kind of like grabbed me out and you said like, here, you got to meet this guy. It's Tavia, he's like a professor and he's a writer and he's a bad bitch. I remember thinking, like, I am not a bad bitch, right? But I love the fact that like you could imagine me as one, and include me in this queer utopian fantasy of a world in which, bad bitches could be professors at NYU, performance studies, right? And writing about work kind of like yours. So that sort of just like instant crush. I was like, this is someone who really is not only making work that I'm excited by intellectually and aesthetically, but also is a person who is, kind of adventurous and inclusive in how he thinks about bringing people into not only into his social world, I guess. So that's maybe kind of where I started. I have no idea if you have any memory of that encounter, Jacolby.
Oh my God.
There's no reason why you wouldn't.
I vaguely, but I'm always being responsible for the craziest encounters. I know.
You never know the thing that someone's gonna remember, right? But that was like, yeah.
That's funny. I love it. Yeah, I remember that wonderful conversation we had with Simone Lee and Caleb Lindsay during the Radical Presence interview. I can't look at it again. I was I was a 3,000% a whole different human being. So like, hard for me to go. I don't even want to see how I'm contradicting myself in that. But it's the vulnerability of like archiving things for YouTube. Even this thing right here, I'm like, oh God, I probably already said some things that. But yeah, it always meant. Yeah, I always like really. I was a fan of your work without you knowing, because you had like, I think you felt like the window to understanding the kind of lens that I was trying to like bring into the art world. And I felt like very few people could without making it into a caricature of some sort. And so in a way, you always felt like a kind of custodian of a certain narrative that needs to kind of be understood by people who probably have prejudices against it. So, you know, I'm very glad to be here doing this 10 years later with you.
Yeah, I can't believe it.
Yeah, or not 10, yeah, 10 years or 30.
It's almost 10 years, yeah. I mean, I think the element in the like, what I ended up at the time, I wasn't thinking about it as fabulation, but you know, you are definitely one of the artists I think of in terms of Afrofabulation, right? In terms of this, like the world building and the blur between the reality and fantasy, not just for its own, you mentioned the surrealism, but also the surrealism of everyday life for Black people, right? You know, and the need to sort of, you know, shift into other modes and to find ways of not both archiving, I suppose, you know, but documenting, offering the kind of trace of those other modes in the work, inviting people into that world making process, I think is what I saw in a lot of the ritual and transformational, and I love this idea around like objects that could be collected and used like in video games. And I have to take your word on it because I'm not a video game player, but I've watched people play video games, and that like those magic bags that people carry around and they pull things out of them and then they turn into, you know, like I just, that's, you know, what I see in so many of the, in so many of the video installation pieces that you were making in this, in the first decade of your career. And then to have those images, have those objects kind of be able to kind of come to life, as it were. I mean, so many come out of your mother's drawings, turn into three-dimensional sculptures, and beyond is incredible. And that's also part of the fabulation of your practice.
Yeah.
The fabulation and a fabrication, as it were.
Would you have a specific question around that, or no?
Oh, are we doing questions now? Okay, yeah. So,
oh no, sorry, no.
No, let's do questions. I wanted to ask about your, you know, when I first saw you, and my point of entry into your work was performance, right? And thinking about bodysuit work, and but also performances like Forest Nymph and Avenue B and Robin versus the Worm. You, in that early moment, did say, like around 2013, that you were interested in performance as enabling a way to extend the frame and the content of the video installation from the digital space to the public in a live space. And you, I wondered if you could talk more about what now gets called augmented reality. This was a term that was, you know, originated in science fiction in the 90s. But what does that mean to you? You've sort of like tested this out. You have proof of concept, right, in terms of your ability to do this work, right, in terms of your own personal archive and your mother's archive. So how do you want to take that, extending the frame of the digital into public space now?
Well, you know, the idea of extending the frame came from, I think when I was in boarding school, I took a photography class, and I think we were talking about extended frame photography. I remember that. And the idea of extending the frame stuck with me based on some principles I learned from that. And when I mean extending the frame, I usually just mean that like, so I was thinking about the fact that, you know, I have this massive lexicon that comes from a giant archive of drawings, things I download off the internet, books I've read about African folklore, like by Robert Farris Thompson. Like I pull from so many things, but the way that I bring them together was very similar to the video games that I played growing up, like Final Fantasy and Chrono Cross. Like Final Fantasy specifically, and Dungeons and Dragons, they specifically have a way of organizing the myth and the lore through like weapons, magic powers, maps, elves, like where you're from, and in the framework of how capitalism puts that out into the world is that there would be merch at Target and Kmart and Toys R Us, and like people will go to Comic-Con dressed up as these characters, and it becomes like the myth, the marketing myth around these products extends the frame beyond the game or the board game or the novel, and or even like and so I was thinking like, well, if I'm making this like meta narrative about my upbringing, like my personal life and my public life, and my public perspective on politics and my personal introspectives on my identity, and it's so convoluted and complicated, I had to really commit to it. I had to literally live action role play my own artwork, like LARPing, cosplaying. I had to treat my whole cosmos of like creation as a sort of like the same like Comic-Con. And so the characters that I was building in my world, from these costumes that I was sewing from my mother's drawings and wearing the costumes and embodying the characters, I couldn't let them just live in the video, because I considered the video sculpture with a capital S. And if it's sculpture with a capital S, those creatures that are moving around and dancing, and like a hieroglyph, like the identity that I'm shaping in these 3D animations, they needed to exist in the gallery and the museum in New York City and at the nightclubs. I wanted to kind of like, it was sort of like an affirmation, or concretizing. It was proto augmented reality, because yeah, I was taking something out of the video screen. I was wearing videos on my body and my breast and my forehead. It was very influenced by Nam Yoon Paik, and very influenced by 70s and the 60s. I mean, I was obsessed with, I was reading my books about the 60s before. Like everything was based on not only gaming and science fiction and pop culture, and, but it was like Chris Bearden and Marina Abramovic, and Bruce Nauman is my number one, like by far. That's the template. But no one would know because people are ridiculous. But like that's Bruce Nauman. Joseph Boyd tells lies about him being in war with rabbits and honey. And like, that's the kind of shit that I was like obsessed with. The idea of like Joseph Boyd being like a mythological, subjective kind of like performance artist, and Bruce Nauman being the modernist object. Bruce Nauman made his body into a modernist object, and he measured his name, he measured his voice, he measured everything based on a sculpture idea. He casted the negative space under the seat of his chair and put it in the gallery. Everything about his studio was a myth. He extended the frame of his studio into physical form. And as a contemporary Black queer performance artist who grew up with gaming and my mother being schizophrenic and making thousands of consumer products and drawings, I think I had something far beyond those two white men I mentioned. But like, because I'm gay, it always gets suppressed as like, well, he's just like some weird faggot, like doing, sorry, I shouldn't say that, but this weird guy doing like, it gets like, it took a journey for it to become something, to become like what it is, or to like be seen. So basically, I used the principles of these people from that era, that Anna Mendieta, Valley Export, what's her name? I mean,
Raymond?
Yeah, everyone.
Interior Scroll.
I'm blanking out because I'm getting.
Yeah, but I think you've given so many of those like key like figures in the performance art of the 60s and 70s, and it's so fascinating to hear how this has been in the stew, as it were, of your work in ways that not everyone always recognizes. And I just wonder, you've said that of in your work, only 20% is being covered, something like that, like, is that part of like the 80% that you think needs to be like going forward, like talked about and understood by critics?
Only 20% is being covered. Oh, you mean like?
I think you said something like only 20% of what you're doing is really understood or covered.
I'm not gonna say, I don't want to put anyone on blast, but like our major curators at New Museum and other people were like very disappointed because they felt like no one was writing the critical essays on my work that were needed. It was a certain kind of like, they just, like it was just, it was like there was no real, I mean, I felt that. And I still feel that, but I feel like I don't really care anymore. But yeah, nobody really, things are just starting to scratch the surface. People want to put you in a box, and it's just, people are lazy, and people just want to, like, I don't know, get the board of trustees in on something so you can move things forward. But like, it just takes time. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, no.
Anyway,
I mean, I wonder if Derrick wants to jump back in on this in terms of anything we've been talking about, but I'm thinking in particular, just going back to where we started with the connections between, the return to painting, the return to exhibiting painting, and the way in which, the way you kind of said, you laid it, I had a question ready, but you sort of answered it in your opening remarks. But the way you approach gesture across in the paintings, which are, some of them are paintings of film stills from the video work, and I don't know if you would call it collage, but there's like definitely an element of like citation in the videos. Like the Namjoon Pike is something I saw. There's the National Enquirer, things like that. You're kind of drawing in the effluvia of actually our recent, including a lot of the sort of, let's say, traumatic racial, both reality and disturbing fantasy of 2020, like the Klan and white supremacy, and this is all kind of like in the mix. And then this is a juxtaposed with these intimate scenes of interiors, and then mythic or pastoral fantasy portraits of Dev Hynes, or a character that he's playing, and then images like the Whitney Houston image, which is it's like a paparazzi image, but these are all paintings now. So like, how are you thinking about that translation of the photograph or the film still to back to your hand as a painter?
Well, I don't consider it being translated. The videos are my paintings too. Peter Halley made SketchUp images for his grids. They start on the computer first. You know that, right? And there are a lot of people who do their studies on paper or on the computer first. Sorry. So, I mean, I kind of get really irritated when everyone's like, oh, you're painting video stills. No, I'm not painting video stills at all. I actually made all of my pigment prints that I did, from in the past 10 years, was because I didn't have the resources. I hadn't have the studio spaces or the resources or the money to like make the paintings that I need to make, but I worked in Maya to test out the variables. I worked in architectural programs to test out like the variables of color and light and space and composition. And I made fantasy. It was like me dealing with all the potential ways to make an image in the architectural space for when I ever had the opportunity to get back to like presenting it on the surface properly. But in the meantime, I put them on aluminum and presented them. Like the way that I make a film is that I make 8 2-dimensional pigment prints first that could exist autonomously, and then I bridge them together as an animation. But what I'm trying to say is that like artists, I think that there's a mediation between the study technology and painting that has existed since Gerhard Richter and since, you know, Wade Guyton. You know, I feel like there shouldn't be a dismissive thing that says that, like, I'm not pulling from animations. I start out with how these things could be paintings first. And then when they can be paintings, I decide to make the animation. It's a very back, and then at the end, I'll make some paintings. But now that it's becoming so full circle, I'll make paintings first, and then the animations come from the paintings, and then they're, you know, paintings afterwards. You know, one thing I love about Matthew Barney is that he does all that crazy sculpture and performance and filmmaking just to find out what drawings to make in the end. That's what the drawings are, the last product. That's why it's called drawing restraint, and the Grandmaster cycle. Like, it's like the crazy sexualized hormonal exertion of the body. It's like what it takes to make a mark, you know? And that's what it is for me. What does it take to make a painting? And so, like, in a way, it was sort of like a sexual release for me to make 12 paintings after making 10 films. And that's what I got from the films. I focused on, like, the simulacra of America's tragedy, you know? Because that's what I got from making those 10 films. Sorry, I'm so passionate. It feels like it's a release talking about this, and it's just like, I'm passionate.
Well, that's something that's evident in the work and the way you make work. And I think that even the intro regarding ideas of joy or just the experience of Blackness, it's not through one lens. And I think that it's a complicated experience. And I think that the work and the way you describe the work or the idea of joy or notions of it should not be looked at in a one particular view. There are many ways to really think about the Black experience and what that means to different people. And I think it's important for artists to really splinter that concept, Black artists to really splinter that concept alone, because there are very many different ways of looking at the Black experience and talking about the expression that can come from those experiences captured in art, you know, because there are issues that are very important to each of us. And I think we respond to them very differently. And I think the way that you're making work from a perspective that is your own and a perspective that is based on your own experience, then it will be catered and also organized in a way that is reflective to your experience, regardless of the name being joy or sorrow. Sorrow is also Black sorrow. What is that? Like, you know, the idea of what an emotion would be as it relates to a race is based on each person's perspective of what the expectations are for that word. So I enjoy that that definition of how you explain the work, you know, and looking at, you know, images of Whitney Houston and saying, you know, and also naming that as a representation of joy, or the idea of it, because it doesn't look joyful at all. But you know, you know, to someone else looking at it, you might think that's joyful, but you know, because inebriation could be painful.
Yeah.
It also could be ceremonial. It could be coming from a party. It could be coming from different places. So I think that the idea of really talking about the elevation of emotion and the way it's captured in the work that you're making, it makes complete sense in the way the output is transferred over in the way that you make the film, the way you've made these paintings, kind of going back into what you were making before, because these paintings are not necessarily a new venture for you, just something that you've returned to in this particular exhibition. And to me, it really kind of connects, you said, as an extension of what you've been doing in the digital world. And for me to kind of see that work or see that approach to your art making from your undergrad experience and seeing you kind of return to that in this particular place. I mean, I definitely feel like that moment when we worked together as your instructor, that was a moment of a similar speed that happened during the lockdown, where it was a moment where you were, you know, at home, like you were in the studio back in those days, working, you know, working in isolation, like you were working in isolation in the studio. So I think that to me, seeing the paintings kind of make perfect sense in the way that they kind of merge together this kind of past experience, this kind of existing experience, and kind of thinking about the future and what could happen through your practice, through kind of revisiting painting and making this maybe becoming a prominent part of a future output for you. I don't know. It might be.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, well, you are always the best at articulating. I mean, that's your gift. So thank you for everything you said. And I thank you for everything you said too, Tavia. Like, I you know, I'm still making, like, I have 2 video games coming out this summer, and I have a concert in the fall. And, you know, like, I'm still have another album coming out. Like, the practice is, I'm fevered. I don't really have a life outside of making art. I find very clever ways to intersect my personal life and attend to my family and my friends. Like, I keep everything very close knit because I'm so devoted to a very dynamic practice. But, you know, I think just because I'm making paintings doesn't mean that I'm just not sleeping. I have 2 films in the work and 2 video games in the work, and they all relate to paintings. And the new paintings that I'm making are mixed reality paintings that when you put your phone or you wear your Ray-Ban mixed reality lenses, the paintings will activate and move. You know, like all of this stuff is conflating, and it's not like, you know, everything is, it's just that I don't like things to be confined into a trope. And I think once that whole NFT and like metaverse kind of trend, whatever that started to happen, I mean, I was already moving out because I was feeling like it was becoming too canonized in this really, really arbitrary way. But I just like to, I don't know, I think it's important to stabilize expectations and break things down and swing the pendulum the other way constantly. I don't even know why I said all of this just now, but yeah.
I think it's partly, I don't know where we are on time, but you know, talking about the album and the store you built at the Pioneer Works, and the, you know, other, you know, dimensions of like, how do you see the question I have is like, how do you see the relationship between this tight world of kind of like around through which you make art and fantasy, and a kind of social practice in which you bring and use the tools that you have perfected around your own story and those of those who you work with closely, and bring, you know, potentially others into it, which is part of what like the nightlife is, right? You know, is a kind of social practice, but there's many other applications.
Can you paraphrase the question again? Sorry. Or like,
how do you take the, like, are you interested in taking the kind of tools that you have, tools that you've built to create a sustainable world for yourself, an ecology for yourself as an artist, to sort of both make your art and to sort of put your life into your art, into a kind of a social practice? And it seems like, yeah.
Oh, totally. So that was the whole thing, is that the whole explanation for the last 6 years of work was I didn't know how to, it was actually really bad for me. How I like, you know, so after I graduated from graduate school, I did 7 residencies. I did the Provincetown Fine Arts Work Center residency for 2 years, did Skowhegan, did LMCC. I just went down this pipeline of residencies until I was like age 27. And then the Whitney Biennial happened. And that's accelerated things to such an intense degree that I didn't even like live life to form a true adulthood because I was so preoccupied with the studio process. And I didn't really have real lived experiences, which brought this personal crisis within me where I felt like I was longing to touch and to feel and to experience and to befriend. And so out of the state of emergency, the social practice became so extreme where I was putting a green screen in my backpack and going to Fire Island They would give me a hotel. I would put the green screen up with my lights and have my friend bring all these clothes. I would have my camera up and I would have every like amazing trans activist and nightlife person and major porn star and club kid and elderly, gay, wise person everyone loves. I had them all participating on my green screen, building an archive of relationships that I had to go back to my studio and record on the computer. I had to trace their hands and their limbs on their animation programs. I had a much larger relationship with these people than they don't even know. I would record them for 2 minutes and spend 5 months dealing with their footage. I also had the, parties at the Standard Hotel with Grindr and Visionaire. We had a debaucherous alcohol and drug fueled party till 8 a.m. depicting like where I had a green screen up in the hotel and people were, it was like between Warhol and Caligula. It was like I let people become their most primal self. It was funny about that experience too. It was like people from the most highbrow elite places, people who was like the editor-in-chief of GQ were mixed in with like, I don't know, the most amazing, beautiful, soulful, down and out sex worker who's just trying to find themselves. All these people were integrating in this one green screen. And I meditated over that footage for 5 years, So like, in a way, it's been important for me for life and art to not to become one. I've read a lot of autobiographies and they say if y'all is burning a candle from both ends by when you fuse life and art in the way that I'm fusing life and art in the way, but whatever, I guess I'm burning the candle. But I think I read, it's kind of a caution, but that's the way I do it.
While we're wrapping up, could you talk a little bit about your Cleveland?
Oh yes.
Project. I think it was a project. I would love to hear people hear more about it.
Oh yeah. That's actually true. Because the way that that 5 years of that, it manifested in something much more positive. Where I was invited by the Cleveland Clinic and the French Triennial to do this major commission it was their first kind of permanent public artwork of its own kind at the Cleveland Clinic. They're building a biorepository center in Fairfax neighborhood in Cleveland, which is a neighborhood that is known for having the highest rate of high blood pressure, cancer, heart disease, and I think it's a high crime rate. It's a really, it's a contentious area. And in celebration of this new building, I wanted to find a way to bring solidarity with this community in the Cleveland Clinic by soliciting and commissioning 105 drawings from 105 residents to make a drawing of what their prospect of utopia is. How can Fairfax be better through a Basquiat-like schematic diagram, line drawing of what utopia is? And what I did with all those drawings while making the paintings, I traced 105 drawings, extruded lines, added planes. I created architectural renderings, my own little metaverse. They were the architects of this utopia that I created, and I made the world. I put all the objects on this wallpaper. I made a Maya Lin-like monument that I erected in front of the Biorepository Center with this $100,000 screen embedded in the middle. And there's a film in the middle of this wall with the names of each architect, which are the architects were homeless people, teachers, people who were essential workers, children. The drawings are of church, God, family, infrastructure, a Rolex watch, a Cadillac. All of this was the language of what utopia is for this community. And in a way, it became like a concrete poem. If Gertrude Stein could never, it became all of the titles of their drawings were so poetic and beautiful. And when you watch the script video play by, you see all these proposals of what a better future could be after COVID, after 2020, after Trump, after, all the hectic chaos that we're in. But anyway, I thank you guys for coming into this thing. I know I'm pretty chaotic today because I'm working on a solo show. But thanks for listening to me.
Jacolby, we're not done yet.
Yeah, okay.
Not done yet. But I just have to say, this has been such a journey and such a decadent treat, where earlier today I was talking to Thelma and like talking about these earlier periods of Black art movements where there were so few of us, that everybody was in one space, that one bar, that one theater, and we were all intersecting and supporting each other. And this felt like, it felt like one of those after hour moments. That we were privy to that intimacy of that build up of commiserating of the journeys that have brought each of you to this space with us. So I thank all of you for this. So I have two questions that I think are really wonderful ways of wrapping up tonight. The first one, Jacolby, in the Studio Museum residency, did you find that you were mentoring some of the younger artists? I only asked because of how you talked about Derrick as your senior advisor, instructor, and it seems so meaningful. I would imagine the other artists could have looked at you as you might have looked at Derrick, as an artist with an established career.
Wait, could you ask that question again? Sorry.
Yeah. So did you find that you were mentoring some of the younger artists during the residency? I only asked because of how you talked about Derrick as your senior advisor, instructor.
I felt like we were on the same, we were all going, we were in such a penultimate confusing period of time. There was no room to mentor anyone. We were all learning our way into a new world out beyond 2019, beyond 2020. I had nothing to teach. I had to learn. And that's the way I feel like when I teach at Yale. I love that. I love it. It's like I feel like I'm going on a Gwyneth Paltrow goop retreat every time I get to go to Yale and talk to these students and listen to them. And I give my feedback. I'm less authoritative and crazy as I was as a student when I was with Derrick and trying to like dominate the class. Like I'm more so like, you know, there's a way, it's kind of like when you talk to an analyst versus a therapist, you kind of have to get people to talk themselves into a place. And so when it came to doing this residency, when we had our Zoom sessions with each other, we were all just like learning our way into the 2020s. There was nobody teaching nobody anything, you know? And I think that was what was the most poignant and beautiful thing, is that like, we were all like Plato, like we were all blind in a cave trying to find light, you know? For sure.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you. And I have one more question. And this is actually a question that I'd love for all of you to answer. But we'll end with Jacolby answering it. How do you find ways to take care of yourself? What would you say to emerging artists trying to find that balance? You say that you don't sleep, but is it possible to self-care and go after your dreams in this way?
Yes, I would say I'm having a personal renaissance where I'm experiencing extreme balance and joy. I've after 2018, I went on this journey of prioritizing 4 to 5 hours of self-care rituals before I made one mark in the studio. I wake up every morning and I do, 180 lunges, push-ups, and planks, and then I drink a gallon of water, and I do these crazy expensive vitamins, and I take a shower and eat a salmon salad, and I just do I think a part of my studio, like, it's just not mixing the paint. It's not like organizing my hard drive. The process is like getting this tool lubed up, ready, and geared to drive the car, and that's a part of the that's literally should always be, we romanticize being like Francis Bacon with the crazy mountain pile of shit in the studio and like the romantic, I've lived in that chaos and I've made a wonderful body of work from that chaos, but I am literally thriving with my new suite of priorities. And I think that like, if you don't prioritize that, you won't have a long lived situation. It's like, you have to and you also have to call your family, call your parents, call your mom, call your aunt, call your brothers. And also just love one another. I think giving is better than receiving. And then once you kind of get all of that going, then the work is autonomous and it's like Teflon and nobody can fuck with it. Nobody, once you get your priorities right, there's no critic that can bring you down. That sounded really hippie, but you know, it's true.
No, I'm grateful. Tavia, Derrick, do either of you have any words of wisdom, advice for emerging artists who are just trying to?
For me, I don't, as an artist, and I consider myself an image maker, I would never make anything that I didn't feel good about. I would not create imagery to leave behind for the world to see after I'm gone that I didn't feel strongly was somehow empowering to the culture in which I feel I represent. So for me, my studio, when I turn on my lights in my studio every day, I enjoy what I see on the walls. And I have the ability, and every artist has the ability to kind of create images that will empower them. And if you are a young artist and you're considering what you want to make, what do you think that your perspective is, that's something that you have, it's all personal. You have to kind of figure those things out on your own. But I will say my philosophy is that as a Black man in the world, exposed to every vulnerable element outside of your door and inside your home, that your creative process and your creative practice is your own, and you should be responsible for shaping the world that you want to exist in. And it's something that you have to work on. It's not something that comes very easily, and it might look easy to others outside looking, but I think that the main thing is kind of really centering yourself and really understanding what your role is and what you want to achieve through your dedication and practice as an artist. And those are all really complicated things to think about. But I find the fact that if you are an artist and you are an image maker, you can create the image, going back to the words of Bell Hooks, artists, being a role in an artist is not just about telling like it is, but also showing the possibilities of what could be. And so I think about that as an artist in my practice.
Yeah, I agree. I want to add that, like, I agree. And I think, like, you should make what you want, how you want to shape the world. But don't be afraid of, like, sometimes shaping the world comes with being like an agent of vulnerability, like emblem of transparency, an emblem, like we don't always have to be we don't have to be a strong Black woman or a strong Black man. Like, I think that is so played out. And I think that, like, in order to make progress in society, I was talking with someone who was teaching me about, like, the role of the clown before the 15th century, before Christopher Columbus and Italy made it, like, the clown become a joke, but the clown was supposed to be this person who was, like, the source of truth. Like making light of something dark for you to get to the truth. And people have forgot that that's the role of an artist. I think if you want to, you don't have to shape the world with, like, you don't have to shape the world with propaganda and cancel culture stuff. Sometimes shaping the world comes from, I feel like Tracy Emin shaped the world with her broad.
Isn't art making propaganda overall?
Art making is propaganda overall. I mean, when you think about Russian constructivism and or like the post-Berlin, like a pre-Berlin walls, like, yeah, art is propaganda, but you know what? No, because sometimes there are art movements, and the art history that I know of, people kind of are making from a place that they don't expect it to ever be seen. And then it's found and it becomes a movement, and then it becomes derivative, and then people lose sight of why it was being made in the first place. But those are the things that push things forward in the first place. When you think about, like, Dada and Fluxus people, they didn't want to be collected by MoMA. They fucking hated the lies that were being told of painting during World War I and World War II. Painting was propaganda for lies, for people who were illiterate, and telling them lies and making them subscribe to bullshit. And so performance came as a way to reject that, to bring randomization into, like, the threshold. Like, how can you write performance scores about randomization, about making surrealism, to reject the narrative of painting, to get to the core of truth? Like the modernism is all about getting to the truth. But because we live in this algorithmic, internet-based, Instagram, data mining universe,
Hey, Jacolby.
the truth is completely eclipsed and it's phony. We are literally corporate church. We're literally the church now. So what I'm trying to say is like, it's okay to shape the world around rawness and vulnerability, even if it's ugly. Because that's what Picasso was doing when he did synthetic cubism. He was showing that the ass, the face, and the eyes can all be seen from the same, like you don't paint representationally, but you can paint it from different angles. Anyway, let me stop.
But take this away. The reason why we're talking about these particular people is because of the propaganda that's been developed around these people. And once they become established within the institution and become sanctioned by the historians and all the academic accolades around them and become commonplace, that's where we are now in art. So that is part of the strength and the success of propaganda as we see it in all of the world when it comes to media, not just with visual art, but with music and everything. A lot of things that, that we participate in as being academic, not like we're outside artists in the woods, carving away whatever outside artists who are discovered by collectors. Not saying to me, because I don't think of those things as negative or positive, but I think it's really interesting that we're at a place where technology is becoming so advanced that it can't be slowed down, and everything that we're going to be a part of with information is so much a part of the progress and the speed of information. So the idea of there's no more underground, there's no more really alternative anymore. Like there's no real other outside place when you think about art. Every movement, every strategy is become part of a formed, sanctioned, supported concept.
Well, I agree. And I agree 100%. But when I think about like 8chan, 4chan, Reddit, all these crazy communities that are making like, I think that there's always room for anarchy and alternative forms of making that we would only perceive as art. Like every decade, something gets into the mix that we like don't attribute as something valuable, and it's actually a canon that's been created by it underground. I mean, the idea of like conspiracy cultures and cults and like people making things like QAnon and the actual vehicle to make something like QAnon is something, I know this sounds really crazy and heady, so stop me right now. But when you think about those kind of like, when you think about the world, that's what that is underground. It's fucked up. There are things that we don't consider mediums that are mediums, and it exists in that dark web, that 8chan, that 4chan, that shit that like nobody, like I don't think nobody at BART is writing about in new media and internet art culture. Like the art is underground still. I think we're just so stuck at like Miami Basil's like auction block that like we forget that there are things that aren't for sale yet.
Tavia, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was just gonna jump in, and I mean, someone said in the chat that like we about to spiral, which is I totally want to go there and have this conversation. But I wanted to circle back just a little while we're spiraling to the original prompt, which was like advice to a young artist, right? And I think it actually does connect to what we're talking about, especially 4chan and 8chan and these other spaces. What I wanted to say about those actually is that these are, I mean, lots of other things happen, right? But like say conspiracy theories or writing, QAnon, whatever, these are narratives that are being built, right? I don't want to get into this question of whether or not they're art or not, right? I would just say that they are highly compelling narratives, right? And they are propaganda, right? I think in the classic sense of, propaganda, the propaganda for something that we don't necessarily like on this call, right? But it seems to me, if I'm understanding Jacolby, I'm hearing what part of what you're saying is that we need to grapple with that power, right? And we may not really know the depth, probably we don't know the depth of that power. But what I wanted to say to the you know, to the maybe like the emerging, the young artist, I say from the point of view of being a teacher, so someone who works with young people a lot, but also not as an artist, you know, as a critic, right? And that can be a difficult, tricky place to negotiate, right? Because sometimes the last person you want to hear from, right, when you're trying to like discover your own voice, is someone whose professionalization is around critiquing, right? And you know, so and I understand that, right? And having like a fellow artist to dialogue with is often better than, you know, than a professor of performance studies, although sometimes those interactions are incredible, right? Someone's really hungry for like say theory, needs help unpacking it, is angry with theory and needs help unpacking it. So I have all those kind of wonderful experiences. But the advice I would give kind of like in general is it's never too soon to find someone to write about your work, even if that person is you, and you are empowered to write about your work. Don't feel, I know it could feel like, oh, but I'm, you know, like, it's not, it's allowed, right? You know, like talking about propaganda, right? Like art manifestos, surrealism, Dada, futurism, right? You know, these are artists writing about their work, right? You're allowed to get together with your friends. You probably know this, right? But I just always want to repeat this to students and younger artists of all kinds, right? And that furthermore, in terms of the traditional sort of critic artist stance, where like the artist kind of like exposes himself and the critic like shuts them down or evaluates them or places them in relationship to a canon. This is, I think, a wonderful moment in time to, you know, kind of like blow up that dynamic apart and think about something a little more in the spirit of what Bell Hooks was like arguing for in relationship to a decolonizing of art and our relationship to art. Not that it has to be simple, it can be incredibly complicated and difficult, right? But that if you are vulnerable in your work, you have the right to expect a critic to be vulnerable in return, right? You know, like the vulnerability that the art exposes, you know, deserves a critic who's willing to, you know, to step away from that stance of evaluation and distance objectivity, so-called, right? You know, which really is about like acquiring objects for, you know, museums and a sort of hierarchy of value, right? And actually allow themselves to be as vulnerable as you have been in making your work. And I think if you kind of stay to those two ideas, right? Not that you have to be the only one writing about your work, but that your work deserves to be described, it deserves to be described accurately, and you deserve to be in dialogue with people who can do that, right? And that if your work is as Jacolby was saying earlier, you know, I was thinking about vulnerability because I'm going to affirm the thing about self-care. I won't repeat it, but yeah, I mean, it takes a lot to get up and do pretty much anything these days, you know, including art. And, you know, so the, you know, so the vulnerability that goes into the preparation to make the work is something that should be respected, right? And the critical experience. And luckily, last thing I'll say is that there are so many more venues for that writing today than there were in the past. And I guess they include 4chan. I'm not sure if there's writing on 4chan. I hope there's good art criticism on 4chan, but I'm always finding some new place to find writing about art. So it's not as in the past.
I wasn't saying that any of these things were art. I was saying the vehicles that can produce some of these dark things, and or these modes of like transmitting information to one another that aren't real, that are sort of like in the periphery of culture, but also shaping culture at the same time, are things to be considered. Even when we think about technologies for data mining, and we think about Cambridge Analytica, or we think about like, I think something around like the way data, I think something around data mining is going to be a new territory for art in the future. And I know that sounds really beyond floaty and weird, but moving on, I do want to say,
this is final thought, final sentiment that you want to leave everybody with.
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna say.
Okay.
I to say that, Derrick, I love you and I appreciate you and everything you have like paved the way for me to like get. So like I think of we don't talk as much, but I think of you every day. And 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 as I just in awe of everything that you do and your work and everything you've done for the Black art world, like period. Like you shaped a better future. And Tavia, I appreciate you. I can't wait to keep working with you at Yale and all this other crazy stuff. And I just love that we all came together. And thank you, everyone. And Happy New Year.
I'm gonna send us out, but I just want to leave with a vulnerable release. Feels like a really great way of capturing tonight. And I thank you, Jacolby. I thank you, Derrick. I thank you, Tavia. This is a night to let linger, to simmer, and to sit and soak in it. And I thank you all for joining us this evening. We still have 2 more offerings from our 2020-21 Artists in Residence coming up this month. On Thursday, February 10th, Genesis Jerez's A Prayer Group will begin for a 1-week run on our website. And on Thursday, February 17th, Texas Isaiah in conversation with Bear Boy, Terrell Brook, and C. Riley Snorton will premiere also on our website. For more information, please visit our website or sign up for our Studio Notes newsletter. Until next time, thank you. Good night. Be well.